Why did the SEALs stop talking the moment she walked into the planning room? Not because she outranked them. She didn't. Not because she demanded attention. She never did. It was the stillness. The way she stood near the wall, hands loose at her sides, helmet tucked under one arm like it weighed nothing at all. The room had been loud seconds earlier. Chairs scraping, low laughter, someone complaining about the heat. But when she entered, the noise thinned out, like oxygen pulled from the air. No one announced her. She wasn't on the main briefing roster. And yet, without anyone saying a word, every man in that room understood something had shifted. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Keller noticed it first. 20 years in teams trained him to feel pressure changes the way sailors feel storms. He glanced up from the satellite imagery, took in the unfamiliar figure, and felt his jaw tighten. Female. Army. Sniper tab worn but faded. No unit patch that stood out. She looked ordinary. And that bothered him more than if she'd looked impressive. "Who's that?" someone whispered near the back. Keller didn't answer. He was watching the way she scanned the room, not searching for approval, not measuring egos, just orienting herself, like a pilot finding the horizon. She met his eyes for half a second. No challenge. No smile. Just acknowledgement. Then she looked away. The briefing resumed, but no one was fully listening anymore. Her name, when it finally came, was spoken almost as an afterthought. "This is Sergeant Mara Kane," the operations officer said. "She'll be Overwatch." Overwatch. A role that usually came with explanations, resumes, bragging disguised as credentials. None came. Someone coughed. Another SEAL leaned toward his teammate and murmured, "Overwatch, from where?" Myra didn't respond. She had already memorized the terrain. Outside, the air was dry and brittle, the kind that scraped your lungs raw with every breath. The target village sat in a shallow basin, mud walls and narrow alleys pressed together like they were trying to hide from the sky. Intelligence said a high-value insurgent facilitator was moving through the area. What intelligence didn't say, what it never said clearly enough, was how fast everything could unravel. Mara moved alone to her firing position. No escort. No conversation. The climb took nearly an hour, steep shale cutting through gloves, heat pressing down on her spine. She didn't rush. Rushing burned mistakes into muscle memory. When she reached the crest, she settled in without drama. Rifle. Glass. Breath. Below her, the SEAL platoon ghosted into position, dark figures melting between walls. She watched them the way surgeons watch a heartbeat, steady, alert, ready for the moment it faltered. Her radio crackled once. "Keller here, Overwatch, you said." "Yes," she said. One word, calm, exact. Minutes stretched. Then everything went wrong. The first explosion wasn't large, but it was precise. A pressure plate charge buried beneath a doorway. The blast lifted the lead element off its feet and slammed them into stone. Mara felt it in her chest before she heard it. "Contact, contact," the radio erupted. Gunfire snapped through the village, screams, confusion, a second explosion closer. Mara was already tracking. She didn't fire immediately. She watched, she waited. Then she saw him. The commander. Keller. Thrown backward by the second blast, body twisting wrong, rifle skidding away. He didn't get up. Blood spread fast, too fast. "Commander down," someone shouted. The radio fractured into overlapping voices, panic leaking through discipline. Marva's world narrowed. Wind. Distance. Angle. The shooter revealed himself for less than a second. A flicker of movement in a shadowed window, confidence bleeding into carelessness. Mara exhaled. Pressed. The shot cut through the chaos like a held breath finally released. The window went empty. But the mission wasn't over. Not even close. Keller was still down. The SEALs formed a perimeter, but they were pinned. Every attempt to move drew fire. Medics couldn't reach him. The commander's breathing came through the radio now, ragged and wet, each inhale sounding like it might be the last. "Overwatch," Keller gasped, voice barely holding together. "We're stuck." Mara adjusted her position. "Copy," she said. She didn't say what she was about to do. She shifted her rifle, scanned again, and began dismantling the kill zone piece by piece. Not with speed, but with intention. Every shot removed a threat before it could fully exist. Down below, the SEALs began to notice something. The fire wasn't random. It was protective. Corridors opened where moments before there had been death. Angles cleared, pressure eased. "Who the hell is this sniper?" someone whispered. Another voice, quieter now, almost reverent. "Are you seeing this?" Mara didn't hear them. She was watching Keller bleed. And somewhere deep in her chest, an old memory stirred. Another man on another ground, breathing fatting while she stayed on glass because moving hadn't been an option then either. Not again. Not this time. She keyed the radio. "Keller," she said softly, "stay with me." There was a pause. Then faintly, "trying." That was enough. Sometimes survival doesn't come from strength. Sometimes it comes from someone far away, refusing to let go. And the SEALs, crouched in the dust around their dying commander, had no idea yet that the quiet woman they barely noticed was about to become the reason any of them made it home. Why didn't she move closer when every instinct screamed that she should? From the ground, it must have looked like hesitation. Like distance. Like indifference. But from Mara Kane's position on the ridge, movement was the one thing she couldn't afford. The wind had shifted barely. Not enough to show on a flag, not enough for an untrained eye to catch. But through her optic, the mirage bent just a fraction more aggressively to the east. A warning, subtle, honest, the kind the terrain gives you only once. She adjusted. Below her, the SEALs were working fast, but not fast enough. Two of them dragged Keller behind a collapsed wall, hands slick with blood, movements sharp with fear they didn't name. The medic pressed gauze hard into the commander's abdomen, jaw clenched like pain could be intimidated into stopping. "Pulse is weak," the medic said. "We're losing him." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Mara's finger rested along the trigger guard, not tense, not loose, just ready. She scanned windows, doorways, rooftops, every place someone could be waiting, every place someone would be tempted to rush a kill. She had learned a long time ago that people rushed when they smelled blood. Her radio crackled again. "Overwatch," Keller said, voice thinner now, stretched like thread. "If you've got eyes, I need them." Mara swallowed. "I have you," she said. "Don't go anywhere." It wasn't encouragement, it was instruction. She dropped a second shooter before he fully leaned out, the round punching through the space where confidence had just started to form. Another threat vanished before the SEALs ever knew it existed. On the ground, Keller's second-in-command, Lieutenant Harris, felt it more than saw it. The pressure had changed. The incoming fire wasn't constant anymore. It came in bursts, then stopped, like someone was holding a door shut from the outside. "Who's our Overwatch?" Harris muttered. No one answered him. Because no one knew. Mara shifted again, elbow digging into rock, ignoring the bite. Pain was just another signal. You acknowledged it, you didn't obey it. Her mind moved with the same calm it always did when things went bad. No tunnel vision, no panic, just problems stacked neatly, waiting to be solved. Enemy shooters. Limited ammo. A dying commander. And one more problem she hadn't voiced yet. Extraction wasn't coming fast enough. She studied the terrain beyond the village. Dry ravines, broken paths, a single viable exfil route that would require the SEALs to move Keller under fire for nearly 200 meters. Too far, too exposed. Unless. She keyed the radio. "Harris," she said. There was a pause then. "Go ahead, Overwatch." Her voice stayed even. "You're boxed in. If you move now, you'll take losses." A hard truth, no apology. "What do you suggest?" Harris asked. Mara hesitated. Not because she didn't know. Because saying it meant crossing a line she'd spent years staying behind. "I can reposition," she said. Silence. "That puts you closer," Harris replied carefully. "We don't have eyes on your route." "I know. You'll be alone." "I already am." Another pause, longer this time. From the ridge, Mara watched the SEALs press closer to Keller, bodies forming a living shield. She saw the way one of them shook out his hands, trying to get blood off his fingers so he could function. She saw the medic's shoulders sag for half a second before he forced them back up. She had seen this before. Different country. Different uniforms. Same moment. "Overwatch," Harris said finally. "That's a risk we can't order you to take." Mara didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted just briefly to the left, where the terrain dropped sharply, offering a narrow, dangerous descent that would bring her within 100 meters of the village. Too close for comfort. Too close for safety. Close enough to matter. "I'm not asking for orders," she said. Then she broke position. She moved fast but not careless, keeping low, using rock and shadow like old friends. The descent scraped her forearms raw. Loose stones slid under her boots, clattering softly down the slope, each sound a potential betrayal. She waited when she had to. Moved when she could. Her breathing stayed slow. At the bottom, she found cover behind a half-collapsed structure, heart steady, pulse controlled. She reset her rifle, rechecked her surroundings, and resumed overwatch from a position that made her visible if anyone was looking hard enough. Above her, the ridge was now empty. On the ground, Harris felt it again, that same pressure shift but sharper now. Protection had moved closer. "Overwatch," he whispered into the radio. "You good?" "Yes." One word. Always one word. The SEAL nearest Keller glanced up at a rooftop as another hostile appeared and dropped before he could fire. The man froze, eyes wide. "That shot came from inside," he said. A realization rippled through the team. She wasn't distant anymore. She was with them. Another shooter leaned out from an alley. Gone. Another tried to reposition. Gone. Each shot was deliberate. No wasted motion. No unnecessary violence, just removal. "Jesus," someone breathed. "She's carving a path." Myra heard none of it. Her focus locked onto Keller. His face had gone gray now, lips tinged blue. The medic's voice shook despite his training. "I need 10 minutes, the medic said. "I don't have 10. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. Then she opened them. And remembered. Another night. Another man bleeding out. Her voice in his ear, because her body couldn't be there. She had stayed on glass then, too. Because someone had needed her to. She had hated herself for surviving that night. Hated the distance. Hated the helplessness. But she had learned something in the years since. Distance doesn't mean absence. It means responsibility. "Keller," she said into the radio, "you're still here." A faint sound came back, a breath, maybe a word. "Good." "Lieutenant," she said, "on my mark you move." Harris didn't question it. "Mark," she said. They moved. Mara fired in a rhythm that felt less like shooting and more like breathing. Threats disappeared seconds before they could fully form. The SEALs advanced in bursts, dragging Keller, covering angles that were suddenly quiet. One of them looked up instinctively, trying to spot her. He couldn't, and somehow that made it worse. By the time they reached the exfil point, Keller was unconscious but alive. The medic slumped back, hands shaking, chest heaving. "He's holding," the medic said. "Barely, but he's holding." The radio filled with breath again. Relief, disbelief. "Overwatch," Harris said. "You saved him." Myra didn't respond. She was already packing up, scanning for the next threat, because missions didn't end when emotions did. The helicopter thundered in minutes later, rotors kicking up dust, chaos swallowing the quiet precision she'd maintained. As Keller was loaded aboard, Harris turned, scanning desperately. "Overwatch," he said again. "Where are you?" Mara stood in shadow, rifle slung, face streaked with dust and blood that wasn't hers. She watched them leave. She didn't follow. Somewhere behind her ribs something loosened, not relief, not pride. Something closer to peace. The SEALs would talk about her later, she knew that. Whisper questions, trade theories. Who was she? Where had she learned to fight like that? Why had she sounded like she'd done this before? They would learn. Just not yet. Because some stories don't announce themselves. They wait until someone is ready to hear them. And Mara Kane, once again, turned away from the noise, carrying the weight of another life saved, and the quiet cost that came with it. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives with a second chance to stay on glass and choose differently. Why did she look like someone bracing for impact when the mission was already over? The helicopter's roar faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence that felt too wide for the narrow street it settled over. Dust drifted down slowly, like the aftermath of something that refused to end cleanly. The village looked smaller now, less dangerous, as if the fight had drained out of it and left only broken walls and unanswered questions behind. Mara Kane stood where she had watched them lift off, rifle still slung, posture unchanged. She didn't track the helicopter. She didn't wave. She didn't allow herself the illusion that survival meant closure. Her radio crackled. "Overwatch," Harris said. "Don't disappear on me." Mara exhaled slowly. "I'm still here," she replied. A pause, then Boots approached from behind cover. Careful, professional. A four-man element moved into view, weapons lowered but ready. SEALs, close enough now for Mara to see the exhaustion etched into their faces, the adrenaline still shaking loose behind their eyes. They stopped a few meters away. No one spoke at first. Chief Keller wasn't with them. He was already airborne, blood pressure stabilized just enough to give him a fighting chance. The men left behind carried the quiet weight of that fact, the kind that settles deep when you realize how close you came to losing someone who anchors everything. Harris stepped forward. "You're our Overwatch," he said, not a question. "Yes." Again, one word. "You Army." "Yes." "Sniper." Mara hesitated. "Yes." The answers were precise, efficient, but something about the hesitation snagged at Harris's attention. He studied her more closely now. The dust ground into the creases of her uniform, the faint tremor in her left hand she hadn't quite suppressed, the eyes that looked past him instead of at him, like part of her was still somewhere else. "Why didn't you identify yourself earlier?" Harris asked. Mara met his gaze this time. "Because it wasn't necessary." A couple of the SEALs exchanged glances. One of them let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it didn't sound so tired. "That's one way to put it," someone muttered. Another voice lower. "She walked us out of a kill zone." Harris nodded once, acknowledging it without ceremony. "You did more than Overwatch," he said. "You led." Mara shifted her weight slightly. "I supported," she corrected. "You executed." The distinction mattered to her. It always had. Harris studied her for another long moment, then motioned toward a patch of shade beside a wall. "Let's take a minute," he said, "before someone starts pretending this was normal." They sat, weapons close, silence stretching between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with things that hadn't found words yet. One of the SEALs finally broke it. "You sound like you've done this before," he said. "Not just training, I mean like it mattered." Mara didn't answer right away. She stared at the dirt between her boots. The ground here was pale, chalky, nothing like the dark soil she remembered from another place. But memory didn't care about geography. "Yes," she said quietly. Another pause. Harris leaned back against the wall, helmet resting beside him. "Keller asked about you on the bird," he said, barely conscious and still asking. Mara's throat tightened before she could stop it. "What did he say?" Harris's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "He said don't let her vanish." Mara closed her eyes. That was the problem, wasn't it? She had made a career out of vanishing. The radio chirped again, higher command checking in, extraction timelines, the machinery of war grinding forward as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Harris acknowledged it, then waved the others off to start policing the area. He stayed. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "But I get the sense this isn't the first time you've been the last line between a man bleeding and the ground he's lying on." Mara let out a breath she'd been holding since the first explosion. "Warden Province," she said. Harris stilled. "6 years ago," she continued. "Different unit, night operation, bad intel." She spoke without drama, without emphasis, like reciting weather. "We took contact in a valley. My team leader went down early, chest wound, couldn't move him. I was overwatched then too." Her fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. "QRF was delayed, weather, airspace, everything that can go wrong." Harris didn't interrupt. "I stayed on glass for 3 hours, Mara said. "I kept the enemy off him, kept him alive long enough for extraction." Her voice wavered for the first time. "He lived," she said, "but he never walked again." Harris nodded slowly. "And you think that's a failure?" he said. Mara looked at him. "I think," she said carefully, "that survival doesn't always feel like victory to the people who carry it." Silence again. The SEALs returned a few minutes later, reporting clear. As they prepared to move, one of them stopped in front of Mara. "You saved my commander," he said. "No bravado, no theatrics, just truth. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't get to take that away from you." Mara swallowed. "I'm not running," she said. "Then what are you doing?" She stood, shouldering her rifle. "Working." They moved out together toward the extraction point, the village shrinking behind them. As they walked, the SEALs asked questions, not invasive, not demanding, just curious. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that? How long you been doing this? You always this quiet?" Mara answered some, deflected others. When they reached the landing zone, another helicopter waited, this one for all of them. Harris paused before boarding. "You're coming with us," he said. Mara hesitated. "I wasn't assigned." "Keller will want to see you," Harris said, "and frankly, so do I." She nodded once. Inside the helicopter, the noise swallowed everything. As they lifted off, Mara felt the familiar weight of leaving something behind, unfinished, unresolved. But this time it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like transition. At the field hospital, she stood just outside the trauma bay while doctors worked on Keller. Blood on the floor. Commands snapped with surgical urgency. Minutes passed. Then a surgeon emerged, pulling down his mask. "He'll live," he said. Mara's knees nearly buckled. She caught herself on the wall, breathing through it, refusing to let the moment make her small. Harris watched her quietly. Later, when Keller was stable enough to speak, he asked for her. She stepped into the dim room, machines humming softly around him. He looked older up close, smaller, mortality stripped bare. "You stayed," he rasped. "Yes, sir." He studied her face. "Name?" "Mara Kane." Recognition flickered. "Kane," he murmured. "Warden Province, I read that report." Mara's chest tightened. "You saved a man then too," Keller said, "even when it cost him everything." She didn't answer. Keller smiled faintly. "That doesn't make you responsible for his pain," he said. "It makes you responsible for his life." Mara felt something crack. Not break. Crack. As she turned to leave, Keller spoke again. "Don't disappear this time." Mara paused at the door. "I don't think I need to anymore," she said. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The SEALs waited nearby, no longer whispering, no longer guessing. They knew now. Not the legend. The weight behind it. And as Mara walked toward them, she felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not pride. Not relief. Hope. Because sometimes redemption isn't about erasing the past. Sometimes it's about finally letting someone see it and choosing to stand anyway. Why did the quiet feel heavier now that the shooting had stopped? Mara noticed it the moment the adrenaline drained away. Not relief. She knew that feeling well enough. This was different. This was the weight that arrived when the world expected something from you and you weren't sure you still knew how to give it. The forward operating base hummed with routine urgency. Helicopters cycled in and out. Medics moved with practiced speed. Radios chirped, boots scuffed, doors slammed. Life went on with mechanical indifference to the fact that a man had nearly died an hour ago. Mara stood off to the side, helmet in hand, watching it all without stepping fully into it. Harris approached quietly, stopping beside her without crowding her space. He didn't speak right away. He understood that timing mattered more than words. "They're debriefing in 20, he said eventually. "Joint review." Mara nodded. "That wasn't in my tasking," she replied. Harris glanced at her, then away. "Neither was what you did out there." She almost smiled at that, almost. Inside the briefing room, the air felt tight. Not hostile, just alert. SEALs sat on one side of the table, Army personnel on the other. Rank mixed in ways that would have raised eyebrows in cleaner situations. A screen at the far end showed still images from drone footage. The village, the blast point, the narrow corridor they'd escaped through. Myra took a seat near the wall. She chose it deliberately. The reviewing officer began speaking, voice neutral, methodical. Timeline, decisions, deviations, successes framed carefully so they didn't sound like accidents. When the footage reached the moment Keller went down, the room went quiet. The officer paused the video. "Overwatch intervention," he said. "Unplanned repositioning, high risk." Eyes shifted. Not accusing. Assessing. Mara felt it settle on her like a spotlight she hadn't agreed to stand under. "Sergeant Kane," the officer said, "why did you move?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She thought of the ridge. The blood. The sound of Keller's breathing breaking apart in her headset. "Because distance would have killed him," she said. The officer leaned back slightly. "You violated standard Overwatch doctrine." "Yes, sir." No defensiveness, no excuse. "And yet," he continued, "the maneuver succeeded." Mara kept her gaze steady. "Success doesn't validate the risk," she said, "only the outcome." A murmur passed through the room. Not disagreement, something closer to recognition. Harris watched her from across the table, saying nothing. The officer studied her for a long moment. "You understand," he said slowly, "that this puts you on record." Mara nodded. "I've been on record before." that landed harder than she intended. The debrief moved on, but something had shifted, not just toward her, around her. The room no longer treated her like a variable. She was a fixed point now, something to be accounted for. Afterward, as chairs scraped and conversations resumed in low tones, a seal she hadn't spoken to yet approached her. Older, scarred, the kind of man whose calm had been burned in by too many close calls. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked. Mara blinked. "No." He nodded as if that was exactly the answer he expected. "Figures," he said, "people who should never want to." He walked away before she could respond. Later that night, Mara sat alone outside the barracks, rifle stripped and laid out in front of her. She cleaned it slowly, not because it needed it, but because ritual steadied her hands when her thoughts threatened to drift. She replayed the mission in fragments. Not the shots, those were clean, not the explosions. It was the moment Harris had told her Keller asked her not to disappear. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding that instinct until someone named it. Disappear. It had started as survival. After Warden Province, silence felt safer than explanation, distance easier than connection. People wanted stories shaped like triumph or tragedy, nothing in between. She didn't have language for the space she lived in. So she stopped offering it. The radio on her vest crackled softly, not urgent, just a channel check. She ignored it. Then her phone vibrated. Myra froze. She hadn't turned it on since the hospital, hadn't wanted to know who might be reaching for her now that her name had resurfaced. She let it vibrate once, twice. Then she looked. A message. Unknown number. "He's asking for you again." Her chest tightened. She stood, leaving the rifle where it was, and walked toward the medical wing without thinking too hard about the choice. Thinking made it easier to turn back. Keller was awake this time, pale, wired, alive. He smiled faintly when he saw her. "You look like hell," he said. "So do you, sir." "Fair." She stood near the foot of the bed, unsure where to put herself now that the crisis had passed. "I don't remember everything," Keller said, "but I remember your voice." Mara swallowed. "I needed something steady," he continued. "You sounded anchored." She nodded once. "That wasn't the first time you stayed on glass for someone," he said. "No." "You don't talk about it." "No." "Why?" The question wasn't sharp, it was tired, earned. Mara stared at the floor. "Because people think silence means absence," she said quietly. "It doesn't. It just means you're still there when things get hard." Keller studied her, then nodded slowly. "You ever get tired of being the one who stays?" The question struck deeper than any accusation could have. "Yes," she said. They sat in that truth together. When she left the medical wing, Harris was waiting. "They're talking about you," he said. Mara sighed. "They always are." "Different this time," he replied. "Not rumors, not guessing. They're asking where you go next." She shook her head. "I go where I'm told." Harris smiled faintly. "That might be the problem." She met his eyes. "You don't owe anyone anything," he continued. "But you should know, you didn't just save a commander. You changed the way my team thinks about support, about leadership." Mara felt that weight again, heavier now. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I know." That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the bass settle into uneasy sleep. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like cover. It felt like a question. Could she stay visible without losing herself? Could she lead without reliving everything she'd buried? Could she let people see her, not as a legend, not as a ghost, but as someone still standing? She didn't have answers. But for the first time, she didn't shut the questions down. Outside, the wind moved softly across the wire. Somewhere nearby, a watch changed shifts. Life continued, indifferent but persistent. Mara closed her eyes, and instead of retreating into silence, she stayed with the moment, uncertain, exposed, and still here. Sometimes strength isn't in the shot you take. It's in the ground you choose not to leave. Why did the offer feel heavier than any rifle she'd ever carried? Mara didn't hear the knock at first. The barracks had settled into that low, humming quiet that followed long operations, exhaustion wrapped in routine. She lay on her bunk, boots off, uniform half folded on the chair beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if it might offer direction. The knock came again, firmer. She sat up. "Come in." Harris stepped inside, closing the door behind him with more care than necessary. He didn't sit, didn't lean. He stood there like someone delivering news that didn't belong to him but would change someone else's life anyway. "They want you in the morning," he said. Mara nodded once. "For what?" He hesitated. That told her more than his words ever could. "Command," he said, "joint tasking." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not qualified for." "That's not what this is about." She swung her legs off the bunk, feet finding the cold floor. "Then what is it about?" Harris finally met her eyes. "They want you visible." The word landed wrong, sharp, intrusive. "No," she said immediately. "I figured you'd say that." "Then why bring it to me?" "Because saying no won't make it go away." Silence filled the space between them. Harris softened his tone. "Mara, what you did out there changed something. Not just for Keller, for the teams. They're asking how many times someone like you stayed quiet while people talked louder." She looked away. "I didn't ask for attention," she said. "I know, that's why they're paying attention." He left her with that and closed the door behind him. Mara lay back down, but sleep didn't come. Her mind replayed moments she'd learned to bury, after-action reports written by others, her role reduced to lines at the bottom. Overwatch effective. Target neutralized. No mention of the hours, the cost, the aftermath. She'd been grateful for the anonymity then. Now it felt like a debt coming due. The briefing room the next morning was smaller than she expected. No crowd, no ceremony, just a table, a few chairs, and faces that knew exactly why they were there. Keller was present via video link, pale but upright. The reviewing officer from before sat beside a civilian in plain clothes, intelligence, if she had to guess. "Sergeant Kane," Keller said, "good to see you vertical." "Yes, sir." The civilian spoke next. "We're forming an inter-service Overwatch advisory cell, small, selective, focused on integration and decision-making under pressure." Mara listened without reacting. "We want you," he continued. She shook her head slowly. "I'm not a strategist." "No," Keller said, "you're a stabilizer." The word struck something in her chest. "You stay calm when others fracture," he continued. "You don't chase recognition. You don't disappear when things get hard. That's leadership, whether you want the title or not." Mara's hands curled into fists beneath the table. "With respect, sir," she said, "I don't do well being watched." Keller smiled faintly. "None of the good ones do." The civilian leaned forward. "This wouldn't be a desk job, it would be advisory, embedded. You'd still operate, just not alone." That was the problem. Being alone had been manageable, predictable. She stood. "I need time," she said. Keller nodded. "You have 24 hours." Outside, the bass felt louder than usual. Every sound seemed intrusive. Every glance felt like it carried weight she hadn't agreed to bear. She walked until she reached the perimeter, where the wire cut the horizon into sharp lines. Beyond it, desert stretched out, indifferent and endless. Harris found her there. "They didn't scare you off yet?" he asked lightly. "Not yet." He leaned against a post. "You going to take it?" Mara stared out at the distance. I don't know how to be visible without becoming something people project onto, she said. A symbol, a story. Harris nodded. Yeah, that part sucks. She glanced at him. You seem comfortable with it. He smiled. I learned something the hard way. If you don't define yourself, someone else will, and they'll get it wrong. That night, Mara received a call she hadn't expected. A familiar voice, older now, roughened by time and injury. Mara. She closed her eyes. Tom, she said. Her former team leader, the one from Warden Province. I heard about what you did, he said. Figured it was you. She swallowed. I didn't think you followed this stuff. I don't, he replied, but people remember the ones who stayed. They talked for a long time, about nothing, about everything, about the nights that never fully left, about the children he'd mentioned years ago in a voicemail she'd played until the sound wore thin. Before hanging up, he said, you saved me twice, once on that ridge, once by not letting my ending define yours. Mara sat in the dark long after the call ended. By morning, her answer was clear, even if it scared her more than any firefight ever had. In the briefing room, she met their eyes. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. The civilian raised an eyebrow. Name it. I don't become the story, she said. The work does. Keller nodded. That's all we'd ask. As she left the room, Harris fell into step beside her. Congratulations, he said. You just made your life harder. Mara almost smiled. Good, she said. Easy never helped anyone. Later, as she packed her gear, she paused over her rifle, ran her hand along the worn metal. This weapon had carried her through silence and survival. It had never asked her to speak. This new role would. She didn't know if she was ready. But readiness, she'd learned, wasn't about comfort. It was about choosing to stay when leaving would be simpler. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't pulling the trigger. It's stepping forward when the world finally sees you and deciding not to step back. Why did the silence return right before everything mattered most? It wasn't the good kind of quiet, not the steady, earned calm that came from preparation. This was the brittle silence that hovered before impact, the moment when everyone sensed the ground shifting, but no one could yet name the fault line. Mara Kane felt it as she stood at the edge of the operations floor, watching teams prepare for a mission she would not lead from the front. Maps glowed softly, drones fed live imagery, voices stayed low, controlled, professional, and yet beneath it all ran a thin current of tension that no amount of planning could fully erase. This mission wasn't hers. That was the point. The advisory cell had been activated only days earlier, and already it was being tested. A joint task force, mixed units, unfamiliar terrain, intelligence that refused to stay still. A senior SEAL element would move into a border region where insurgent cells had learned to hunt overwatch positions first. Too many missions had failed that way. Too many snipers silenced before they ever fired. Mara stood behind the line of command, hands resting lightly on the table, listening more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was never loud, never declarative. Pause there, she said once gently. The room slowed. Your overwatch placement assumes the enemy reacts to contact, she continued. This group does, they wait. A commander frowned. Based on what? Mara tapped the screen. Based on the gaps, the places no one's watching because they feel wrong, that's where they'll be. No argument followed, just a quiet adjustment, a shift. Harris, now leading one of the elements, caught her eye briefly. There was trust there, not blind, earned. The teams deployed at dawn. Mara stayed behind. That was the hardest part. She monitored feeds, tracked movement, and listened to breathing she couldn't see. When contact came, it came sideways, just as she'd warned. A sniper nest triggered early, but this time the overwatch wasn't alone. Countermeasures kicked in, movement rerouted, a kill zone dissolved before it could fully form. Lives stayed intact. Hours later, the teams returned, dusty, exhausted, whole. No celebration followed, no speeches, just quiet nods, small acknowledgments passed between professionals who knew exactly how close things had come. Harris found Mara near the back of the hangar. "That call you made," he said, "saved us walking into something ugly." Mara nodded. "You would have adapted." "Maybe," he said, "but we didn't have to." They stood in companionable silence. Later that night, Mara walked the perimeter alone. The wire hummed softly in the breeze. The desert stretched out, patient and unmoved by human victories or losses. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the urge to disappear into it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Keller. "He's asking for you." She didn't hesitate this time. The hospital room was quieter than before, less urgent. Keller looked stronger now, color returned to his face. When he saw her, he smiled without effort. "Looks like you found your place," he said. Mara considered that. "I found a way to stay," she replied. He nodded. "That's harder." She sat beside the bed, the machines between them humming steadily. "They'll tell stories about you," Keller said. "Already are." Mara's jaw tightened. "But," he continued, "they'll get most of them wrong." She exhaled. "I'm okay with that." Keller studied her. "You didn't used to be." "No," she said. "I thought silence was the same as dignity." "And now?" She looked at her hands, scarred, steady. "Now I think dignity doesn't need defending," she said. "It just needs room to act." When she left the hospital, dawn was breaking. Pale light crept over the base, softening hard edges, revealing details that darkness had hidden. She passed soldiers she didn't know. Some nodded, some didn't, a few looked twice. She didn't correct them. Weeks later, as operations continued, Mara's role settled into something sustainable. She didn't brief every mission. She didn't insert herself where she wasn't needed. But when pressure mounted, when voices rose, when certainty fractured, she was there. Quiet, anchored. Not as a legend. As a constant. One evening, Specialist Evan Solis, older now, steadier, sent her a message from another theater. "Used your packing technique today. Worked, thank you." She read it once, then tucked the phone away. On a ridge far from where this story began, Mara lay prone behind glass once more. Not because she had to, because sometimes being present still meant being unseen. Below her, a patrol moved carefully through open ground. They didn't know her name. They didn't need to. She watched the wind, the mirage, the spaces between movement. When the moment came, she didn't rush it. She never had. Later, as the sun dipped low and the mission concluded without incident, Mara packed up slowly. She took one last look through the optic, not at a target but at the terrain itself. Familiar, honest, unimpressed by reputation. As she rose, she felt no need to mark the moment. Somewhere, seals would whisper again. Stories would circulate. Questions would linger. Was she that sniper? The one from the ridge? The one who stayed when commanders were dying? Mara Kane walked away without answering. Because the truth didn't need a voiceover. It lived in the men who made it home. In the leaders who learned to listen. In the quiet choices that held lines no one saw. Strength, she had learned, isn't loud. Redemption isn't dramatic. And dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.